Now that you've seen the tools that are available to you and the scholars, our next speaker is going to show you how to best apply these tools and to make an impact. So Dr. Iveta Simera, we are very pleased to have Dr. Simera with us. She is the Deputy Director of the UK EQUATOR Center, in which she leads the development of the EQUATOR online resources and the training program, and EQUATOR's collaborative activities with PAHO, with the UK Health Research Authority, and the Global Health Network. As a member of the EQUATOR Steering Group, she influences the strategic direction of further EQUATOR network development. She joined the Center for Statistics in Medicine in Oxford in 2006 to help establish the EQUATOR to improve the accuracy, the completeness, transparency of health research publications to enhance the value and usefulness of published research. Dr. Simera has broad research and project management experience, including lab research, development of systematic reviews, and clinical and reporting guidelines. She has a PhD in plant genetics from Charles University in Prague, and a degree in business administration from Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne, Australia. So I'm going to hand the floor over to Dr. Simera, who's going to facilitate a session, hopefully an interactive session, on research papers that make a difference. How to increase research value, reputation, and impact. Dr. Simera?
Thank you very much, Karen, and thank you very much for inviting me, because I must say I sadly missed yesterday, but today, even during this short morning, I already got so many stimulating ideas, and it's always absolutely fascinating to work with Luis Gabriel and PAHO generally. And I think our solution to many problems would be if cloning is much more advanced and Luis Gabriel could be cloned and widely distributed. We're slightly short on time, so yeah, I've been just generously added 15 minutes. Maybe the interaction won't be really hands-on work, so you don't have to leave the room or be scared. But I will focus. Well, what I wanted to say from the morning, to me, there's a very important pattern emerging, because on one side, as Karen mentioned, I'm a scientist. We have scientists who are forced to specialize very deeply, who struggle to keep up with information overload, because we have so much new knowledge generated every day. PubMed, for example, indexes over 1 million articles a year. So there's really loads. So if I'm a scientist, it's very difficult to keep up, even within my field. And then on the other side, things we're hearing today and we know are really important is for people to see things in much broader context, to be aware of lots of things. So in a way, they can come up with solutions which are slightly outside their field. So I can see this as contradiction, and it's something we need to somehow support to overcome. But all this comes down to effective communication, because even people who try to collaborate with somebody from even slightly outside their immediate field, they come across difficulties in communicating way, because we all develop jargon and our own language, which is typical for our own work, and often forget that people might not completely understand what we mean. And as I'm going to show you, sometimes people struggle even within one field. And after hearing so many exciting and innovative ideas, I will focus on research papers, which is not innovative at all. Research papers been here since, if I'm not mistaken, 16th century, when first scientific journals were being published. And we still, for us, are still key vehicle of communicating science. We have them much more sophisticated than we used to perhaps a couple of years ago, but it's still research paper, which is the most important output of scientists. And when I was sort of asked to come here and talk, I was asked to put it in the context of universities, because our program, we have to work with many stakeholders. We work with researchers, we work with journals, journal editors, but we also work with research institutions. And for each of those environments, different things are slightly different and important. So I will split my talk into three slightly distinct areas. I will focus on research output and how to make impact from what your institution, your researchers produce. And I will also venture into something slightly different about how you build university reputation. How are universities judged? What are the rankings? Things you probably know a little bit more than perhaps I do. And then I will try to bring all this together. How you maximize the value and impact of the research produced by your universities, and at the same time, how you build strong reputation for your institution. And Karen very kindly introduced me, but I would like to say that in addition to being ex-scientist, and now I spent over 10 years as a program manager for the EQUATOR Network initiative, which EQUATOR stands for Enhancing the Quality and Transparency of Health Research. And we focus on helping people to publish research in a way that is highly usable and can really make an impact, because I'm going to show you that very sadly this is not the case for all research publications. But I also wanted to say that I'm a parent, and my son started this year studying biochemistry at the University of Oxford. So we spent last year, or last 2 years, absolutely agonizing and researching universities and looking into various options as parents, discussing it with my son. And so I have this experience as somebody who sent their child to university, and what were the important things for us, for my son to look at, how we look at the universities. For my benefit, and maybe for your own benefit, if I can ask to show your hands, just to let us all know who is in the room, what is the main focus on your work? Who here is responsible or involved in health research in your institution? Okay. Who is involved in developing course content, influencing curriculum at universities, running course, for recruiting students, for international development, any other key roles are sort of okay. So I will talk mostly about health research because this is area where I work, but principles are very similar for other research fields as well. I know very little about Brazilian science, so I did some research for myself, and very helpful in Nature published a couple of years ago, very good overview of science in South Africa. And although you can't probably see the details, the first picture shows the publication output of research from South Africa. And as you can see, Brazilian output is by far the highest. And but when we look here, this picture, this graph, shows the impact of those publications. And it's very imprecisely measured by number of citations and international collaborations. And as you can see, although quantitatively Brazil is absolutely #1, when it comes to being used and cited, the research is on the average. So there's room for improvement, how to make much bigger impact from the research that's being carried on in Brazil. Measuring research impact is incredibly difficult, and Luis Gabriel, he mentioned that some things are almost impossible to measure as well. So from very limited ways how we can measure it, the easiest people go for are numbers because they don't require lots of thinking when we interpret them. But very often they are very imprecise and people are fixed on impact factors. Publication in high impact factor means my research is absolutely best. And there's lots of issues connected with this measure. We can measure research impact as change in our knowledge, how we advance understanding of particular issues, or how we change how we do things, processes, we introduce new treatment, new methods, and so on. Or outcomes, we can measure how many people we cured from a particular disease by developing this drug. So there are different ways how we measure impact of what we do, and this impact can be on further research, on using my findings by somebody else in their research. On economy, we heard a lot about generating profit, income. In England, the buzzword is wealth creation. This is something which drives universities at the moment. They're employing lots of business-minded people and connecting health service, health research with those businesses with the aim to create wealth, monetary, but also otherwise. So I would like to show you, for those who don't work in health research, the complexity of medical research. And although you probably can't read very well all the details, I think the important message here to show is that the research is continuum, that we move from basic laboratory science where we might make big breakthrough discoveries through preclinical research to trials in humans where we test new drugs, new interventions, to massive randomized trials, followed by perhaps observational research where we can pick up some rare adverse events and so on. We need qualitative research, diagnostic, prognostic research, economic analysis. So there's lots of research types going on to advance our knowledge. And we need to pool all this knowledge together to inform policies. And we're doing so through development of systematic reviews, clinical guidelines. And the ultimate aim of this is to improve patients' health. And I may be stating the obvious, but people usually work in their field and they focus on their field and they don't realize this continuum that what I produce in my lab, in my trial, will be then used by somebody else down the line. And I think this usability concept is slightly escaping lots of people for pragmatic reasons like being extremely busy and trying to keep up with developments within their field. But it creates lots of problems because, and this problem is best demonstrated through research publications, that we don't think from users' point of view how my findings from my research are going to be used further. And I have a couple of examples to show you from health research what I'm talking about. And I won't go into any technical details, but basically randomized trials are the currently gold standard methodology to assess the effect of intervention. And I picked this trial because it addresses very important public health question. If malnourished children which are HIV positive can benefit from milk protein supplementation. Ideally, trial run like this because it is extremely difficult to run any pediatric research. So ideally, trial like this should be included in systematic review, and when the WHO guidelines comes to an update, it should be ideally considered for update of this guideline. And this is roughly to guide you through the process of research synthesis, where researchers goes from formulating clear research questions, identifying studies, to assessing the quality of those studies. And this is extremely important step because you can identify 10, 20 studies, but some of them might be done in a, I don't want to say bad way, but there's no some research is clearly very poor, and you don't want to, you have to account for that if some research findings might be biased or so. So you have to assess how robust are those findings. And this is part of the process of doing systematic reviews, so you don't take everything for granted. And then you synthesize findings and present the results. And I'm really sort of focusing on this, assessing the quality of presented research. And one of the things is that you would look at methods. Is there a possibility that the study might be biased, that something has not been done as it should be? And to assess if something is done really well or done really poorly, or if researchers has not done it at all, you need information about this. And you need enough information provided in research paper in order to make the judgment. If this information is not there, you can't answer this question. Or if it's ambiguously or clearly reported, you just can then assume. And it's a huge issue. So Cochrane Collaboration, which developed very robust methodology for developing research synthesis, they have very nice graphical system. If reviewers can assess that this particular methodological aspect was done well and is very low risk of bias, that is represented by the green dot. If something went not so well in the study and this particular step can influence research findings, then they will conclude that there might be high risk of bias, and this is represented by the red dot. But what is most problematic are those yellow dots where nobody can say if it was done badly or well. And this is a huge issue because that means that the findings of this research are not being presented in a way it can be used efficiently. And it's something which can be really easily avoided. I've circled the trial, which I showed you before. When you read the trial, it's, I believe, 5 pages of dense text and tables and everything. And as you can see, you can't clearly, apart from one question, you can't clearly answer any of those methods, basic methodological questions. And it's a huge issue. This trial comes from Brazil, but it just, it's not specific for Brazilian research. All countries are equally guilty of this. So, huge issue. Another example I would like to show you about sort of prevalence of this problem, study done by Ludovic Treves, who's clinical research fellow here at PAHO, and Ludovic and his colleagues, they were looking into what types of randomized trials are being done in Latin America, and they look in relation to funding source. But Ludovic was very kind and shared his raw data with me, so I can look at things which interested me. And so Ludovic and colleagues identified that most of the trials produced in Latin America are done in Brazil, which probably doesn't surprise you. It's over 300. And for those, about half, 160, had some information about funding. So they could analyze these a bit more, and they assessed this risk of bias I was just explaining you. And what they found, that actually there's lots and lots of good science going on in Brazil. They could answer that very good science, very well randomized trials in 70, 84, all those questions. And just for very few of those trials, they could identify high risk of bias present in studies. So that's very positive. But what's much less positive is the numbers where they couldn't come up with this answer. All those numbers in the yellow column, they have to conclude that the information presented in papers was insufficiently clear that they couldn't make a decision. And this is very wasted because then nobody can use the results properly in the practice. And I'm stressing this because of high proportion of this. And it's a widespread problem in medical research. And it goes from description of methodology to insufficient information about study findings, about interventions, and so on. If you have interventions, which is perhaps diet or exercise, something which is not that expensive as developing new drug, and you find that this is something which works. Dr. Correa was talking about increase in chronic diseases in Brazil, obesity on rise everywhere around the world. So if there's effective exercise regime, lifestyle regime, we want to recommend it to patients. But if you can't find details of this effective information, that's how it can help anybody that somebody did research where they concluded it was fantastic if nobody can use it in the practice. So it's an absolute waste of time, resources, and people's effort. So this is just to sum up my point that such a simple thing as an unclear description of research in papers or any other research report prevents us to assess the quality, reliability, relevance, and to use the research further. And it creates waste, but this waste is easily avoidable. And we should be all aware that until fairly recently, nobody looked much into the research. We published research and we took it on merit, what was written. But perhaps with the development of systematic reviews and the need to synthesize primary information, we now put a lot more scrutiny into published research. And I'm talking about health research, but all this is going on elsewhere. Health research is somewhat ahead because if somebody dies, that hits the headlines first. Physical research, in physics, things are moving at slower pace. But the same notion goes in many, many other scientific disciplines. So research into research, or sometimes people call it meta-research, is on rise. And hardly a week passes that some of those studies which look into quality of research conduct, quality of research publication, completeness, is not published. So we should be all ready for much more research scrutiny because we want research to be reliable, reproducible, and also useful, usable. And this is basically summing up what I've said. Are there any questions at this point? Anything of or comments? So I will move on about how people who are interested in universities, how they look at them. One of the things is top universities. My husband, he spent entirely last year looking at all those league tables and every other day he bore us with new ratings and so on. So it is important to parents. And it's important to scientists who are looking for employment, for collaborators. And I picked this one. It usually publishes the top 100 universities in the world. And it's very interesting that key indicators, how they assess universities. And those 6 indicators, they have different weighting. And academic reputation carries the most weight. 40%, and so the citation per academic faculty at the university is 20%. Other factors are obviously important as well, but those 2 are very, very important. So creating supportive research environment, providing resources to support high-quality research at your institution, provide training for researchers, particularly for young ones, PhD students, is really extremely important. And to create the right culture, I talked at the beginning about this extreme pressure that we all really struggle just to keep up with our immediate tasks and goals. Creating right culture, mentoring, helping, that requires effort and time as well. And it's difficult to actually make happen. The bottom bit does come from this Nature series. There was a very interesting short paper from one of the Brazilian scientists calling for rewarding quality, not quantity. Publishing in leading journals is one of the things which creates this academic reputation. And there's a large number of journals with great reputation, and key to the success is good research, but obviously well-prepared manuscript. And I'm again highlighting this citation table here. And well-prepared manuscript has to be well-written, good logic, good scientific writing, and so on, but also well-reported, so that no information is missing or ambiguous, so that editors and peer reviewers can quickly assess the merits of the research. It's quite tricky, because if you look at practical points, for example, in medical research, any research project generates lots of paperwork. We have patient-level data sets. We have lots of completed case reports, massive study reports. So it's lots of material. Then when we work on them, we have lots of data graphs, and then you're required to compress all this into fairly short research articles. So extremely difficult for scientists, and again, particularly for young ones, to make a decision what to include in a paper and what to leave out, what's important information and what perhaps is not that important information to be included in a paper. So it's a nightmare. And I would like to talk about reporting guidelines, because those are tools which help make those decisions, which really help in writing papers which contain, as a minimum, key information important for those assessments which are showed at the beginning and for helping people to use the research. And in a way, they are reminders of scientific content, because research methods are developing fairly fast. So it's difficult for me to keep up with my own research, let alone with developments in statistics and research methodology. Some of them focus on clinical focus, because, for example, I might be doing research in psychology and define certain things in a certain way, and Karen might be doing the same thing, but she defines it slightly differently. And then people who read my paper and Karen's paper, they can't really decide if we're talking about the same thing and compare same thing. So lots of guidelines are also focusing on harmonizing clinical terminology, on definitions, and so on specifying and defining outcomes. All this which would help further use of research. And most internationally accepted guidelines are based on evidence that something is a problem if it's not reported in the paper, and also on consensus, because for certain things you really don't need that much evidence. But for example, labeling your study as randomized controlled trial in the title and abstract is fairly common sense, because if you don't do that, then your paper can never be found during electronic searches and so on. So not quite sure how detailed the site is for you, but here is the checklist of one of the probably most known reporting guidelines for randomized trials, and it basically provides framework for writing up the whole paper, from the title, abstract, introduction, through details of methods. What are the key elements researchers need to describe about their methods, findings, discussion, and so on. So you have just framework for the whole paper. And it's not just trials on the right-hand side. There are similar generic guidelines for all main study types in health research. Lots of these guidelines are being adapted for other types of research. Juliana in the morning mentioned she's a vet, veterinary community, because it's very similar to medical research. They adapted lots of these guidelines for human research, and those which were not adapted are being used as they are. Preclinical animal research, psychology, there's a lot going on in software engineering, for example, and so on. So the move towards standardization is moving. Journals increasingly require scientists to adhere to those guidelines. And it's very late when researcher learns about this, when they already written the manuscript and submitted. it's really upsetting then when you're told after so much effort, actually you need to rewrite it. So those are 10 journals with highest impact factor in general medicine, and all of those require adherence to guidelines I just mentioned. This is the Lancet page, so that you can see the details, but half of this page specifies the guidelines people need to adhere to if they want their research to be considered for Lancet. Most journals follow ICMAG guidelines, which are the guidelines developed by International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, and there again, adherence to reporting guidelines is strongly encouraged. I mentioned at the beginning the international collaboration. Research funders are, I would say, slowly waking up to the fact that they put lots of effort into selecting projects they're going to fund and not really caring that much what comes out of it, because there's a notion that research can't be reproduced or can be just with great difficulties, and that the awareness of all these issues are being bigger and bigger. So, for example, in the UK, Wellcome Trust, which is a charity funder which funds lots of research relevant to South America, together with Medical Research Council and Biological Research Council, they produce a report on strengthening reproducibility and reliability of biomedical research. And I would think that if people from abroad want to collaborate with UK scientists, they should be aware of those initiatives. And this report is actually very interesting because it proposes strategies how to strengthen reproducibility of research. And at the very bottom, you can see use of reporting guidelines is proposed as one of the strategies, because you, as I mentioned right now, improve the quality of research output and information about research. In England, we have massive exercise collecting information about research produced in the country. It's called research assessment exercise, and creates headaches for universities and for scientists, but produces metrics. And there was a paper published recently, Lessons Learned from this, and I highlighted this lesson 5, which basically said that researchers who deliver high quality academic research also deliver high quality impact. And research publication obviously is closely connected to this. There's also some research emerging that better completeness of research reporting actually pushes your citation rate up. And again, it's quite common sense. If people can understand what you did, they're going to use it rather than paper where they have doubts or where they're not quite sure what you have done. So I'm sort of at the end of my second block. Are there any comments or questions on this?
Thank you. Just to comment, and sometimes reporting, when it gets to the reporting stage, it's too late. It might be genetic or congenital problems on the project stage. So that's why it's so important to emphasize the need for funding agencies and also editors of Brazilian journals to actually take that into account. So if the project is not well designed in the first place, so there's not much you can do at the reporting stage.
Absolutely.
So we need to improve, also improve the way everyone would design this things.
Completely agree. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we do and exactly how we would like to address this question as well, because that's absolutely right. So I will talk a little bit about our work and what we can do for you, and then we produce some suggestions for you, what you might perhaps consider doing at your universities, what might be appropriate or useful. So we set up the EQUATOR program almost 10 years ago, and the first aim was to improve research reporting, because, as I mentioned, the quality of research publication then allow us to judge the research and so on. But as you very rightly mentioned, it's at the end, and many editors said, it's far too late when researchers come to us. So we move into training, and we're trying to help people in planning and designing their research better. So that's our long-term goal, to actually use those reporting standards to improve the quality of research. And those first years of our program, we focused and we collated resources, which I'm going to show you, which aim at publication. But some of those guidelines are also for development of research protocols, which helps with research planning. And from this year, we started developing toolkits which help people to address questions of good research design and so on. I run lots of workshops on research reporting, but very often I end up sort of discussing how you do research and how you plan and how you design. So it's very difficult to separate. We focused first on easier issue, if you like, with the notion that what you really have to address is how the research is done as a process. So this is the key people in the EQUATOR Network. Most of the work at the moment is done from the UK under the directorship of Professor Doug Altman, who spent almost his entire life researching the ways health research is done and improving methodology for health research. And we have absolutely fantastic steering group, which consists from editors, scientists, and so on. And 2 years ago, we started spreading because we can't run everything from Oxford. So at the moment, we have 2 centers, one in France, one in Canada. But as I'm going to speak later, we work with partners like PAHO and trying to disseminate what we do as far as possible. One of our collaborations, Global Health Network, so through them, we focus a lot on Africa and other developing countries. I come from Eastern Europe, and so I'm trying to spread this influence, this direction, because sometimes Eastern Europe is slightly overlooked region, but there are issues as well. So the key things, what EQUATOR does, we're trying to raise awareness of the problems which results from bad description of research, and awareness of resources which are here, which exist, and help people to overcome those problems, help them to publish faster and in better way. And we realize that providing resources is not enough, that education and training needs to go hand to hand together. And we run lots of training ourselves, but we also encourage institutions and lots of individuals, either under our influence or going through our training, then they develop their own training, or they incorporate teaching on reporting guidelines in their courses. So this is how our website looks like. And I would encourage you to have a look what sort of resources we have on offer. There's a library of all guidelines which are available, which help writing scientific papers, but we also have toolkits which provide much broader advice, particularly for inexperienced researchers, some selected advice on scientific writing and so on, because these people don't have much experience even with basic writing of papers. And I mentioned our absolutely fantastic collaboration with PAHO, and I'm not going to go through those policies because Lise Gabriel already mentioned them, but I think it's absolutely fantastically defined set of policies and measures, and we're very pleased to be part of making some of those objectives happen. So we signed Memorandum of Understanding in 2010 with the main aim to support highest research reporting standards in PAHO regions. And one of the first things we did, we translated our resources into Spanish and recently we managed to translate them into Portuguese. And there are split sort of opinions about translation, because at the end, English is science communication language, and people need to learn at the end communicate in English. But from my own experience, certain concepts are much better understandable when you learn about them in your own native language. I do lots of translation for Cochrane reviews when some paper is published in my language, in Czech. And I communicate a lot with scientists, and I can see that the understanding outside native English-speaking world is more poor, if you like, of certain methodological concepts, because some languages even don't have easily translatable versions of certain methodological terms. So there's a lot of merit into translations, and we're very pleased that we could produce the key resources in Portuguese and in Spanish. And we do lots of collaboration through librarians. Librarian, best friend of a scientist. Librarians, they're eager to push resources to help researchers. So we're engaging librarians from research libraries to facilitate identification of appropriate reporting guidelines and assist researchers in writing, preparing good papers. So this is, Luis Gabriel already mentioned the Portuguese resources. And I would like to show you some numbers about our own impact. And started quite modestly, but over the years we had over 1 million users on our website, and currently we get about 35,000 users per month, and it's rising steadily. We're trying to make access to those guidelines as easy as possible. So the key ones are listed on the homepage, so people don't waste their time and get what they wanted really quickly. I already mentioned that we do lots of workshops, courses, and so on. And I pulled some numbers about uptake of our resources, which relate to Brazil. And Brazilian scientists, it's the 6th biggest user of our resources worldwide. And you probably can't say, but most eager ones come from Sao Paulo, state of Sao Paulo. But we have quite a lot of users of our resources, but that doesn't really mean that it can be higher, but already people are finding it very useful. Last year, there has been extremely successful conference in Rio de Janeiro on World Conference on Research Integrity, and high prominence have been placed on issues relating to responsible reporting of research studies. Because until recently, particularly thanks to the US definition of research misconduct, which focused on fraud, plagiarism, can't think of third F thing, just those three very simple things, which in a way form small minority of problematic things in the science, and issues like selective reporting or incomplete reporting were called questionable research practices. But people are coming to the opinion that actually this is much bigger problem than those few instances of fraud. There's been quite a lot of papers published by Brazilian editors and Brazilian scientists promoting reporting guidelines, promoting our resources, and we really encourage that. If I put my glasses on, I can read you what one of the editors said. The use of these statements can benefit authors, journal reviewers, and readers. From the author's perspective, these statements have the potential to ease the writing of manuscripts, as these minimum sets of recommendations are likely to guarantee all relevant aspects of research design will be covered. Journal reviewers can use the statements to check if all necessary information from submitted articles was presented or not, which can guide their decision to accept the manuscript or provide the feedback to authors how to improve their manuscript. Finally, and most importantly, from the reader's point of view, articles that are written based on the recommendations from these statements are easier to interpret and appraise, and ultimately they will help readers to make better decisions in clinical practice. So I think that pretty much sums up reporting guidelines why we should bother, actually. Aside from more imperative, because we involve humans in research, how do we benefit as individuals, also as institutions? And we prepared a small sheet of papers because I thought it might be easier for you to take something home, and one sheet of paper is not that much for the plane. With some suggestions what you might perhaps consider doing in your institutions, because reporting guidelines, in a way, to put it into terminology of this meeting, they're like social innovations. They started to be developing by scientists who couldn't make sense of research. So they involve other people and came up with some solutions. But clearly, it's not just researchers. There need to be leadership and influence on every level, which relates to responsible research publication. So clearly defined policies at institutions, requirements and expectations, not just focusing on quantity, but quality. Leading researchers and students to available tools and standards, providing education, access to training is extremely important. And motivation and incentives are very, very important, because so far I think we're very much behind rewarding high quality, but still focusing on quantity. So I'm hoping that you find some of these suggestions useful, and I'm really hoping that in the last 45 minutes I persuaded you to give this a serious consideration and do something at your institutional level, at your departmental level, to support better publication of research. And if there are any questions, I'm very happy to take them. Oh, I completely forgot, because my Portuguese is non-existent. I can only say muito obrigado. I have a colleague who works with me in Oxford, and he's fantastically gifted statistician, and he does training with us, and he's Brazilian, he's from Rio, and he very kindly recorded a message.
Meu nome é Michael Schlussel, me formei em nutrição na Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro e desde então estou envolvido com pesquisa na área de saúde. Atualmente eu trabalho com ensaios clínicos na Universidade de Oxford e foi quando eu comecei a trabalhar aqui que eu tive meu primeiro contato com a EQUATOR Network. A EQUATOR é uma iniciativa fabulosa que facilita o desenvolvimento de pesquisa de ponta. O material que eles reúnem, organizam e disponibilizam me ajuda a solucionar questões que surgem no dia a dia do meu trabalho. Mas mais importante do que isso, utilizando os recursos da EQUATOR, eu tenho a certeza de que os meus projetos terão uma metodologia forte e transparente. Na minha opinião, a EQUATOR é importante não só para pesquisadores, mas também para os estudantes e profissionais da área de saúde, porque o conteúdo do website e os cursos que eles fornecem desenvolvem a capacidade crítica. Sem dúvida, a EQUATOR é um impulsionador de carreiras.
Thank you. Muito obrigada. I heard the word fabuloso, something. Thank you. That was very helpful, and I hope for all of you, it gives you, this past hour has really introduced you to the tools that are available to the students and to you, and that you can see this is, PAHO is a technical organization, and what we bring to this partnership is these research tools and these networks that are open and available to all of you. So we hope that you'll use them and these resources. So thank you very much, Iveta.